Deep in the rainforests of Central Africa, there are people who rarely grow taller than 4.5 feet. Not from malnutrition or illness, but from something written into their biology across 60,000 years of forest life. These people are among the shortest populations on Earth, and for most of human history, nobody outside the forest knew much about them. They had no particular reason to care because they were too busy knowing the forest in ways that no one else on the planet could match. They could identify hundreds of plants by sight, smell, and the texture of a leaf between their fingers. They moved through undergrowth so thick that taller people simply could not follow, hunting with poison arrows and reading the land with a precision that took generations to build. They built shelters from branches and leaves that took hours to assemble and left no trace once they moved on. Their size, which outsiders saw as a limitation, was the architecture of their survival. When scientists finally studied them closely, what they found inside their bodies did not just explain the Batwa, it raised questions about the entire human story, about how old we really are, about what we have forgotten and most of the world has never heard of. This is the story of the Batwa, one of the shortest tribes on Earth. This is Zawadi. She is in her 70s and has lived at the edge of the forest her entire adult life. She can name every tree visible from where she sits. Not just name them, she can tell you what each one is doing right now. She learned none of this in a classroom. She learned it by walking through the forest every day for the first 40 years of her life, moving behind people who had done the same thing for years, reaching for exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, until her own hands learned to reach before her mind had finished forming the thought. She has not been inside that forest in over 20 years, but the forest, in every way that matters, is still entirely inside her. The Batwa have lived in the rainforests of Central Africa for at least 60,000 years. They were in the forest before the farming communities that now surround them and before the idea of a border had occurred to anyone. They were small, rarely taller than 4.5 feet, and for a long time, people looked at the Batwa and assumed their small bodies were the cost of a hard life. Then scientists took a closer look, and what they found completely dismantled the assumption. A 2012 genetic study found specific regions of the Batwa DNA tied directly to reduced height. Deliberate biological architecture, selected across thousands of generations, written so deeply into the body that Zawadi's grandchildren, born in a settlement far from any forest, are still short. But reduced height was not the finding that made researchers go quiet. Buried deeper in the Batwa genome were traces of populations that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. People who lived in this forest vanished from the world's memory and left behind no graves, no ruins, no record of any kind. Except a few quiet signatures folded into Batwa DNA, the Batwa did not simply survive in the forest across 60,000 years. They may have absorbed the last living traces of people who were already ancient when recorded history began. The forest was building exactly the people it needed, and it had been doing it far longer than anyone realized. What the forest built went far beyond height, because what the Batwa knew and how they live exceed anyone's imagination. The Batwa travel in groups of 15 to 50, small enough to disappear completely into the undergrowth and large enough to hunt together and carry each other through difficulty. They follow the forest's own rhythm, moving camp every few weeks so the land behind them can recover, reading signals most people alive today would not know how to look for. When the forest goes quiet in a particular way, the Batwa knows something large is nearby. When a specific bird call changes mid-sequence, something has disturbed the canopy 200 meters away. Zawadi could press her palm flat against the base of a tree and read the moisture moving through the roots beneath her hand, finding water the way someone else might read a map. She did not learn this from instruction. She learned it from decades of pressing her palms against trees until the trees began, in their own way, to answer. Among the Batwa, authority belonged to whoever understood most about what the moment required. In a forest that changed every hour, fixed hierarchy was something the forest itself would have punished. Knowledge was the only thing that kept everyone alive, and everyone knew it. Before the wider world reorganized itself into the shape it holds today, kings across the region sought out the Batwa specifically. Their ability to read landscape and living systems was so precise, so far beyond what anyone else could replicate, that rulers who wanted to understand the land they governed needed the Batwa to explain it to them. They were the ones other people came to when ordinary knowledge ran out. And at the center of everything they knew, there was something that researchers in the 1970s were completely unprepared to encounter. The Batwa sing in a way that exists nowhere else on Earth. Every voice arrives simultaneously, each one weaving a separate thread that only makes sense in relation to all the others. The melody lives in the space between the singers, assembled in real time, present only when everyone is listening to everyone else at once. Pull one voice out and the whole thing dissolves. Researchers who documented this in the 1970s called it among the most technically sophisticated communal singing ever recorded anywhere in the world. The elders, when asked about it, described something else entirely. The Batwa sang to the forest the way you speak to someone standing in the same room. They used specific layered chants to draw a particular bird out of the canopy, a bird that would then fly slowly ahead, leading hunters directly to wild beehives. When the honey was taken, a portion was always left behind. The bird knew this. It came because the arrangement had been honored so many times, it had become, in whatever way a bird understands such things. Zawadi still sings. Sitting at the edge of what used to be her world, her voice finds the old patterns the way water finds its level. She feels like reaching towards something just out of reach and no longer certain whether anything reaches back. But the singing was only one language the Batwa had developed for speaking with the forest. There was another, one that required no voice at all. Just hands, roots, bark, and 60,000 years of paying attention to what the living world was quietly offering. Somewhere in the Batwa's 60,000 years inside the forest, they developed a pharmacological knowledge that researchers are still trying to fully document. Hundreds of plant compounds, specific preparations for specific conditions, dosages refined across generations of observation, close enough to constitute something that looks, from a distance, like clinical practice. What makes this remarkable is not the breadth of the knowledge, it is the precision. The Batwa did not use plants the way folk traditions typically do, broadly and hopefully. They used specific parts of specific plants at specific stages of growth, prepared in specific ways for conditions that required specific outcomes. That level of refinement does not come from intuition. It comes from thousands of years of careful, transmitted, accumulated observation. Some of those compounds have since been identified by pharmaceutical researchers as genuinely bioactive. Some are still being studied. Some the elders knew about have not yet been examined at all, because the people who held the knowledge are no longer able to pass it on in the way it was designed to be passed. Here is what Zawadi sees from where she sits. The forest is right there. On a clear day, she can name the specific trees at the settlement edge. She knows which one holds the roots she used to dig in February, what the light through that section looks like when the season is about to turn. 60,000 years of her people's attention to that place lives in her body, her hands, the automatic reach of her knowledge toward a world she can see but no longer enter. Her grandchildren are growing up in a world that forests never designed them for, and yet when she watches them, the old patterns are still moving through them in ways they cannot explain and have never been taught. The forest is still writing through them. It does not know the place is gone. It simply keeps writing. Zawadi's youngest grandchild is 7. Sometimes she asks what the forest smells like. Zawadi tells her, and the girl listens with an attention that looks less like curiosity and more like recognition. Maybe that is what 60,000 years feels like from the inside, something that does not need to be understood to keep being true.